was wandering through the aisles of my heart's store. I bought myself a upcomic drum and some Bristol core. I made a fancy comic, and now I am all set to be the greatest web cartoonist on the fucking internet. I'll have a forum and a blog and links from DVD. I'll get reviewed by Webster, and William G. The world can be a royster. I think it's a safe bet when you're the greatest web cartoonist on the fucking internet. When you're the greatest web cartoonist on the fucking
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Planet Earth Live, the show we're calling See You Next Wednesday, aka The Zardoz Connection. I think we have a few other titles, and subtitle Advanced Cartooning Class, with me, your host, Chuck Whelan, and my regular co-hosts, Chris Porro and Mocat. We're hoping Dale Ciproli will be joining us at some point. He's floating around out there somewhere in the universe. And today, our very special guest is my very good friend, Mr. Wyndham Wallace. Wyndham's he's been many things, but he's involved in music as a record label representative, running a record label, writing music journalism, and managing bands, including, most notably, Lee Hazlewood, who is very famous. He's often described as the most famous musician you've never heard of. And Wyndham himself has described him as the man who co-wrote These Boots Are Made for Walking and co-sang with Nancy Sinatra. And we all know that song. But he actually, that's just really the tip of the iceberg. The tip of a massive iceberg of incredible work, which I've actually been having a bit of a listen to this week, in order to the show. But then, unfortunately, I hit myself on the head a week ago. I had to curtail my listening activities.
How is your concussion?
It's much better, thank you.
Okay.
Yes. It
wasn't
just.
Did you invite me during the period of concussion to join you?
It helps. It helps. It's sort of. I felt like I sort of jumped the track. It's like. But I think I'm chugging along. I was talking to a local artist here, Paul Madonna. He's quite well known in San Francisco. He paints these sort of wibbly-wobbly landscapes of San Francisco. He's really a cartoonist. His series is called All Over Coffee. But they're really sort of landscapes of San Francisco, although he has done other things. But he was in a terrible, terrible accident just before the holidays, I think. He was driving along in a little smart car through Golden Gate Park area, I believe it was, and some huge black Mercedes SUV smashed into him, could have nearly killed him. Apparently it totally shattered his foot, but he's recovering very well. He's doing very well, actually, and so that was good news. But I forgot even why I was got onto him. But
smart cars
anyway,
aren't safe.
What, sorry,
smart cars aren't safe. Is that where you were going?
We're talking about your concussion.
My concussion, exactly. So I was like, okay, well. Yes, that's how sorry, concussion does mean I'm sort of forgetting things a bit. So.
Sure, blame it on the head injury.
That's what it's going to be for the rest of my life now. It's good. Okay. It never really happened to me before, though. I don't know, Wyndham, did you ever get a concussion in all your life?
You know what? I don't know if I ever have done. No. I mean, the last time I even tried to hit somebody was 1989 in a car park in Hampshire in England, and I missed. So I'm not good in fights. I don't get hit very often.
Or they ducked. Did they?
So now I have to know.
No, I just swung like a big girl.
Okay.
I didn't punch like that. I kind of just went. Woo!
Yeah, you're a lover, not a fighter.
What was the fight over?
Quite absurd, really. I was just waiting in a pub car park to get picked up, and I was sitting on a wall, and for whatever reason, that was the car parking space that these guys decided they needed. And when I didn't move out of the wall, off the wall, they just climbed out of the car, and one of them took a swing at me. So he connected, and I thought I'd stand my ground and took another swing at it and basically nearly fell over and legged it.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm a pacifist these days.
Wait, which car park was it?
It was one of the pubs in Hook, actually.
Oh well. Yeah, you were, like, of all the pubs in that Hampshire, probably Hook is probably the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. You should probably explain to your viewers that you and I have frequented some of the same pubs during the course of our youth.
Yes. Well, we both grew up in the same village called Nately Skewers,
which is the most magical English name, near another village called Maple de Well.
Yeah, well, or Maple Durwell. As
I
we
like
call it
Maple
now
de
there.
Well.
But Nately Skewers, actually, if you live in Nately Skewers, you say Nately Skewers. Nately Skewers. You speak like that.
From there, my
That's
mother
a proper
moved
Nately
to,
Skewers accent.
But from Nately Skewers, my parents moved on to Hartley Wintney, which is another like extraordinary British or English name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Hartley Wintney you hear from time to time. I've heard Hartley Wintney referenced on TV at least twice since I lived here. But that's probably because I watch too much TV. But also, Nately Skewers, I was getting my shoe shined downtown, as you do. I think we were having a dress-up smart for work day when we worked at the ad agency. I worked at an ad agency with Chris for several years in the early 2000s. We had a dress-up smart or Mad Men day. You know, that was back when Mad Men had only probably just started. I don't know. So I thought I'd go get my shoes shined, and he was shining my shoes up. And he said, where are you from? We started talking. He said, I had a girlfriend from Nately Skewers. I was like, what?
Wow.
The chances.
I mean, I couldn't really believe it, but all right, you know. But maybe that's just he just wanted me to come back for another shoe shine. Was trying to see back good at first, so I don't know where you.
Anyway, that was the last time
I was just surprised there were any girls. The only girl I knew from Nately Skewers was your sister, I think. You know.
The only one I knew was yours.
Oh, and my sister.
So okay. We got a musician on. What's your emphasis?
Well, you know, wait. Let me correct you. I don't think Wyndham's actually a musician.
No, I mean I am a trained musician insofar as, you know, I learned to play the piano and the trombone and the recorder, and I was head of the choir as a dutiful little 12-year-old boy. But I haven't, and I sang in bands and stuff like that when I was a teenager and stuff, but I haven't performed more than a couple of times, I think, publicly in, 30 years. The last time being, I think, singing backing vocals for Morcheeba at Brits
So you're a
Academy.
musicologist.
I'm a music critic. I'm a music fan. And somehow I've managed to carve out a life since I left university that has allowed me to work with music in one way or another, pretty much without ever stopping. And it's still a source of absolute amazement to me.
So as a music producer, right? Because you've basically taken other bands, other musicians and stuff, and allowed their music to be introduced to the world, right? What is it that you do in that process?
Well, there are so many different ways that I've played a role like that. I mean, I've been a guy. I've worked as a publicist. I've worked as a record label representative. I've worked as a manager. I've worked as a critic. I've worked as a music consultant for movies. So it's a hard sort of question to answer, but I think, I just try and contribute to whatever it is an artist needs me to do. And, if that's, this morning I was interviewing a Polish musician for an hour and a half, purely so I could actually write what would be her press biography. That will be the document that is presented to the media across the world and is meant to shape their anticipation for that record and what to expect and what to talk about if they like it and stuff like that. I can do that, but I also spend half my time just listening to records and deciding if I have any interest in writing about them. And then the other half of the time, I'm trying to persuade somebody that I should write about them.
So we have a question from the audience: is what is better, being classically trained or jazz trained?
I got it.
I think.
Yeah. So when Chris himself is a musician, yes, and a music producer. So yes.
Okay. I mean, personally, I think that it's an underrated talent, an underrated facet of musicians to be classically trained. I think, if you want to be in rock and roll, it's really good to know what rules you're actually rebelling against. And it teaches you discipline. It teaches you all the things that you actually need to know. I mean, this woman I interviewed this morning, her name is Hania Rani, very talented pianist, keyboard player.
Ooh,
And,
will she come on the show?
Sorry?
Will she come on the show? We need guests.
If she likes what I've written, I'll ask her. But she used to train like 8 hours a day. That's proper training. Like playing the piano is an exhausting thing, and so as a musician, I think to be classically trained means you actually have a greater understanding of what's required, but also where you can step outside the line and make it interesting. Which to me is the most interesting thing about music, is when I'm surprised.
Yeah, it's a rare breed of musician that has like this structured classical background or structured jazz background that actually goes into like pop music.
Well, Metallica. I mean, a lot of those guys have classic background.
Yeah, I didn't know that. But in general, for like pop music, there aren't a lot of those people that come from these super structured backgrounds and go into pop music. But it's pretty cool when they do. I want to say Eddie Van Halen, but I think he was all self-taught, but he was one of these virtuosos that managed to really tap into what was going on in popular music and still be a virtuoso, which is also like a rare thing.
Well, Freddie Mercury was trained as an opera singer before he ever went into rock.
Well, that makes sense, because listen to Bohemian Rhapsody.
Do I really know music knowledge you don't know, Wyndham?
I'm sure you do. Absolutely.
Mocat's had a number of things Mocat's done is incredible.
Yeah.
Mocat, have you ever been in a band? So I've asked you this before. Have you ever been in a band? Do you play music as well?
I can play guitar poorly, and I actually used to make my living singing when I was a princess for Disneyland.
Okay.
And so I made my living singing, but I had the same recording that I went over each time. It wasn't like I was playing with live people. I really have only played with live people on a handful of occasions in my life. Usually it's just me plucking a guitar at my own and playing badly in my room and trying to teach myself songs.
Wyndham, I wanted to ask you, are you currently running a label?
No, I stopped working on that side of the industry, I don't know, about 14, 15 years ago, soon after Lee Hazlewood died. I kind of felt that I'd given, at that point, probably 20 years of my time to trying to promote other people's creativity, and it was about time I tried to do my own, to exploit whatever I might have in terms of creativity. So I stepped away from that side altogether. Now looking back at it, did you ever think, oh, I got out at the right time? Because to me, like, labels seem to be having a harder time every year. You ever look back at it and say, yeah, I got out at a good time?
Oh, yeah, when Wyndham was in it, he was raking the cash.
Well, no, I mean, not like that, but just like, I think, now this is my impression, I've never run a label, but my impression is it's harder and harder to run labels these days. And I think, when I left, I remember sort of in the year or two before I'd left, that I had seen a huge rise in the amount of Excel spreadsheets that I was having to look at. And far more decisions were being made in terms of what we could spend than what a project needed. And I think that has no doubt become even more intense in the years since, because things have got much tighter for labels. They've had to completely restructure their the way that they earn money. I'm
sure the internet's been a threat. I mean, for crying out loud, Lord started out on YouTube.
The funny thing about the internet is that the internet was like the greatest opportunity the music industry could ever have possibly wanted. The ability to pretty much deliver product to people for free, in terms of like the costs that they would incur and so far, rather than sticking it in the back of a van, having it driven across the country, having to return broken copies and all kinds of stuff. That was an amazing opportunity. And the music industry, as so often is the case, just to use the phrase Boris Johnson would like to use, or is prone to use, they stuffed it up the wall. They just completely wasted this opportunity of going, oh my God, this solves everything. Instead, they saw it as a threat, which is kind of
Stuffed it up the wall.
I have
Stuffed
with the
it up
music
the wall. That's just sinking in.
I learned British slang today.
That's a good one.
So like instead of embracing it, they decided they were going to take Napster to court and fight. You know, in the late '90s.
And it's funny because, like, I have a disc by Dead Kennedys, or not a disc, a tape by Dead Kennedys, where the other side was left blank so that you could record music on it and fight the record companies. That was the whole point.
I don't know about all of you, but certainly when Chuck and I were growing up, like the sharing of music on cassettes, whether it was recorded off the radio or just off somebody else's vinyl or whatever, that sharing of music was absolutely fundamental to what turned me into a music buyer. And here we had a chance with the internet to allow people to taste things and then still have the pleasure of actually wanting to buy them. Of course, they weren't going to buy everything that they downloaded for free, but I never bought half the stuff that was given to me on a C90. But, you know, some of the music that I love the most, I remember, in fact, two bands that I had never, ever listened to closely were both on a cassette that Chuck's sister gave me when I was about 16 or 17. She gave me a cassette which included, I think it was Here Comes the Sun King by the Beatles, which I'd never heard before. And I just thought, oh my God, I thought they were all about She Loves Me, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. And there was a song by a band called Can, who are a German band in the 60s and 70s. It was a song called Turtles Have Short Legs. And it was staggeringly brilliant. And, you know, I now know one of the guys in that, like, legendary German band. And I've done work with him. That knowledge started from the cassette that your sister gave me. That's what piqued my interest in the first place. And that's what made me...
She had good musical taste, my sister. Yes, she actually. She was. Well, I'm quite. I'm not. It's funny. I've had a sort of bit of a musical revolution later on in life. I mean, I've always enjoyed music and liked music, but I didn't care too much about it, and I certainly didn't have any sort of musical taste. And you know, yeah, my sister had amazing taste and always had a very good collection of albums. And you know, as did most of my friends. You know, that's just one of those things. I think. You know, and I was a cartoonist. No one else was a cartoonist.
I don't know. I know so little about music. Weird Al is my introduction to a lot of new musicians.
But you know,
I'm not joking.
Okay.
I'm you know, I'm not joking. I'm not saying that as a joke. Like, I'm serious. Like, I listen to him and I go, oh, this is kind of nice. I like this. Okay, I'll listen to this. You know, the original, and then I'll listen to the you know, I'll expand the catalog of music and listen to that. And generally, he has pretty good taste in music. Like, I tend to like what he parodies.
I mean, I work very, very hard to keep the snobbish side of my nature at bay these days. I even was part of a documentary about the Scottish band Travis, which is built upon the premise that the first time I met the singer, I don't quite know why I even said it, but after about 2 minutes of having chatted to him, I said, by the way, can I just let you know, I really don't like your band. I just don't want that to be a problem. And then I suddenly thought, why don't I like his band? And the more I thought about it, I thought, I've just adopted that opinion from other hipsters around me who use it as shorthand for a bit dull. And actually, I've never listened to a Travis song particularly closely, but I do know exactly where I was when I heard one of the first time because it hit me so hard. So I try not to be too snobbish about it. Like, if somebody loves a band, that is their choice. And if they're passionate about them and it makes them happy or excites them or comforts them, I don't care if you learned about that from Weird Al Yankovic or from, you know, the Wire magazine.
Yeah, but I think, yes, you did used to be very opinionated about music, I think. You had, you know, but I think that was also because you were doing sort of music journalists and writing critical. Yeah, I mean, you know, that was sort of your job, really, is sort of to be like, I don't know if you would use the word critic, but probably that's what you were sort of doing because you had a very strong opinion about it, you know, and you'd listen to these things and you discovered things like Lee Hazlewood, like, you know, reading your book and reading about how you sort of like how, that sort of connection you had made with the music, and that people did make with his music, and you were sort of going around really sort of seeking that out. Again, it was hard. That internet's again made sort of things a little easy for us to get. It's very interesting though what you said about the sharing. I think that
I'd also love to hear your opinion on the Wrecking Crew, and their influence on music.
And I'm trying to the Wrecking Crew. Refresh my memory.
The Wrecking Crew were on everything.
Oh, the guys, the LA house band. Yeah.
Yeah, the one that Sinatra worked with very closely. Lee Hazlewood worked with large numbers of them regularly.
Yeah. It's
okay. I don't know about. I've heard of the Wrecking Crew. I don't know anything about them. Lee Hazlewood worked with them, did he?
It's the Los Angeles very famous house band, and I think actually one of the guys that I produced or co-produced his vinyl for, he was working with the arranger for the Wrecking Crew, Richard, and I always say his name is like Hippopotamus, but maybe if somebody knows who that is.
The hippopotamus?
Something like that, yeah. But anyway,
he'll be happy to be remembered that way.
Yeah, the hippopotamus.
Yeah, he's still alive. He lives up in Washington.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I was doing a Flight of the Conchords joke, so.
Oh. Well, I'm sure he'll be happy to be remembered that way. I'm sure this is what people will remember him from, this cast here.
To answer your question, though, I mean, they're clearly like some of the finest players of their generation, and I think everybody I've ever spoken to who worked with those musicians just said it was just the finest experience they could have. You just turn to these musicians and say, can you play it like this, and they'd play it like that. Can you play it another way? And people like Lee Hazlewood, as producers, are not necessarily classically trained or well versed in musical vocabulary, and so you'll find there are people like Lee who turn to these musicians and will say something like, can you make it sound a bit more pillowy? And these are the musicians who understand instinctively what pillowy means. This is the weird thing about music. It's built on the idea that we should all, if we're working in pop, rock, whatever we want to call it, that we're all sort of, we're obsessed with breaking the rules, but without knowing what the rules are.
Yes. What are the rules? What are the rules? Yes.
I had read this really interesting article that basically said pop music hasn't structurally changed. Like, it's the same chord progressions, it's the same 12 semitone scale, it's the same major scale, the same pentatonic, the same minor, relative minor. It's been theoretically, it's been the same forever. And the big thing that changes with pop music is the sound of it. So if you have a different drum kit and you have a different guitar sound and you have a different vocal delivery, that can define a whole genre. Even though that genre is using the I don't know what you want to call it, the underlying infrastructure of, I guess it'd be Western classical music, and then some other fundamentals for rhythm and stuff like that. Like, it might have like a jazz beat or a blues beat, but like what fundamentally changes is like production and the quality of the sound. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I mean, I think it's true.
I actually spent an awful lot of time recently thinking about exactly this issue. And it's something I think I've thought about probably for most of my sort of conscious life, once I really started caring about music, because I can even remember a conversation in a barber's when I was at school as a teenager, in which he said, the thing about pop music, eventually you're going to run out of ideas. There's only so many sequences you can have, like mathematically, and it's all going to be over. And I was like, nonsense, that's never going to happen. But I am now really appreciating, acknowledging the structural limitations of pop music, and the fact that we will often say, especially as critics, it's very easy to fall into this trap. Oh, this song is clearly influenced by orchestral maneuvers in the dark, for instance. But then you kind of realize, actually, it's not remotely influenced. It's just that they're using the same key synth. They're using a Prophet or a Juno or whatever. And essentially what we're hearing is the same song or the same sound, but we are now seeing legal cases about this against, Ed Sheeran, multiple cases against Ed Sheeran, saying that he's stolen songs. He's just used four chords in the same order.
Yes,
But,
yeah,
I mean,
well, he won that one now, so that's good. Yeah, that's pretty good
saw
for his
an
other
interview
cases.
with
This
him.
Yeah.
once happens though.
So-
Okay,
yeah, go
I
ahead,
don't
Mocha.
remember who wrote it, but it's Mars. It's about the god Mars. It's an it's a classical piece. And it sounds so similar to the Imperial March that when you listen to them side by side, you go, "Oh yeah, Williams totally stole that," right? But he didn't. They're completely different pieces of music.
Well, and
hundreds
let's
of
remember
years
that
apart.
copyright is a relatively recent invention. Like previously, before movies and TVs and things came along, there wasn't really copyright. I don't think, I mean, certainly like, comedians and stuff would do each other's acts, like who's on first, famous Abbott and Costello routine. But that was a popular routine that a lot of comedians did. But because they were the ones that did it in the era of TV or cinema, that they became identified with that, and that became theirs. And you couldn't really copy because they'd say, "Oh, they're doing Abbott and Costello." But before that, you could. And these laws and companies like Disney work to extend copyright laws to protect intellectual property. And now intellectual property is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean,
it's interesting what you said though about the barber. I did. That's where I discovered 2000 AD was at the barber.
Here's an interesting one though. That if you listen to Stevie Wonder's album, The Secret Life of Plants, I think it's the second track on the second side of the vinyl. I can't remember the name of the track. There is a melodic theme in that is note for note the melody of the Twin Peaks theme tune. And this is about 15 years, recorded 15, 20 years in advance of the Twin Peaks theme tune. And it's literally note for note the melody. It's a long melody and it's note for note. And I've never heard anyone complain about that.
I mean,
so it's just coincidence. You throw a bunch of things into a bag and you shake them up and you pull them out in a certain order. That's what songwriting.
That's what that's what their argument for AI is. We put all this stuff in the bag, but then with AI, it was saying like, well, you have to pay for that stuff you put in the bag.
Which I think realistically we should.
Yes.
I mean, there's this thing about ideas developing like in parallel ways, like people coming to the same conclusions without actually copying each other. Like isn't like writing one of those things or civilization that they don't think that now they think it developed simultaneously in several parts of the world. And I mean, there's this other thing about like once a melody or a piece of music is out there and it's like in the public sphere, it just seeps into your subconscious. And maybe you don't even know you're ripping it off, I mean, I'm sure somebody that's good with numbers could figure out like the chances of that Twin Peaks tune actually being just randomly created. It's probably pretty low.
On the note of AI models basically being plagiarism software, right? You fill the bucket and it spits out what's in the bucket. There was a stock photographer that had something like 3,800,000 images that he's taken for stock photo and free photo and all these different stock photo websites that were fed into Midjourney. So he filed the papers and stuff to basically have his stuff removed from that bucket, and was hit with a cease and desist letter and then a lawsuit for damages to Midjourney because it was such a large chunk of their sampling that it actually affected the algorithm when you remove those pictures. Like they couldn't, because they used them so fully to train it that they would have to pull that training out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but it's also completely absurd.
Yeah, it is.
Here's the car I built. I put a new steering wheel into a Ford, but it's mine now. I mean,
and they're going to monetize Midjourney, and when they do, they're probably not going to pay out to people. I think that's a problem. People don't get compensated for their training data. They're training an AI model that gets monetized.
I am firmly calling it plagiarism software. It's plagiarism software.
Hey, Dale.
Hi.
Sorry,
Dale. Dale's here to shine down upon us. It's like the sun coming out from behind a cloud.
Hi, Dale.
Puppy dogs and rainbows.
So, okay. So, I mean, You said that you don't like play in bands or anything, but I'm sure you still noodle with the piano at home.
No, not even that. I think the only musical things I ever do, apart from discuss it in extreme detail sometimes, is like I sing when I drive a car from time to time. And I gotta say, I'm doing a road trip in Colorado later this year.
I'm in Colorado.
Oh, that's
Oh,
cool.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
So when I'm in Colorado, I fully intend to take like a 3-day trip through the Rockies, and I'm going to have music all lined up, with shit that I can just, with stuff that I can just,
cool. Can we do a carpool karaoke? Can we do a carpool karaoke episode, please? Let's do carpool karaoke episodes. You can pick up.
We should try to do it, and it'd be fun. Like a remote
I mean, what's his name?
Right.
James Corden's quit. He's retired now, so I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of James Corden. I don't think he was. I don't think
anyone's a fan of
popular,
him.
right?
But it's interesting because the carpool karaoke, they show him driving and, they're sitting there and singing and stuff. And then somebody took a picture of them when they were going around Los Angeles, and they're on a rack, right? So he's not actually driving the car. They're being driven around. They're towed, right? And so it's like, hey, how can it be, carpool karaoke if like they're not even really carpooling? They're just like being dragged around. And so then he was like, oh no, we only do that for some shots and everything, rather than just admitting like it's for safety reasons or something like that, right? And so it's after that, like I lost a lot of respect for him. Not because of the being carried around, but because of his like response to it. He was so shisty about it. About like he had to prove that he drove, and it's like, who cares? It's a TV show.
You need the element of risk.
He felt it.
I think if that's your greatest concern about carpool karaoke, you've got off lightly.
I never really watched the show. I never found him entertaining, and he was in the movie Cats, which is awful. And I
never saw that. That did look truly awful. Yes.
Okay,
Jennifer Hudson had an amazing voice, and she couldn't even save memory because the timing was off on that song.
Amber, you saying the movie Cats is awful with that avatar?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Experts.
Yeah, the Mocat was the target audience for that movie. And
yes.
When you use a Mocat to look like it.
Mocat hates cats. Yes.
So besides the carpool, the singing in the car, what else are you doing out in Colorado? Or is that the whole thing?
Well, I have a friend who moved out there, and I'm going to go and visit him and his partner. I intend to do some record shopping. I potentially will be reuniting with some very old friends, but they're not expecting me there. So it's a bit
when you come out on Colfax, there is a store called the Tattered Cover. It's a bookstore. Right next to it is a record store I don't remember the name of. But if you type in the Tattered Cover, Colfax, Colorado, or Colfax, Denver, it will come up, and then you'll see the record store.
Okay, well,
it's fantastic.
I'm going to be in Longmont apparently.
Yeah, it's not that far from Longmont. So it's probably maybe about a 20-minute drive from there. But this record store is amazing. They have some vinyls under glass because we're talking like, Beatles singles and stuff. Like, it's a good record store.
I'm just looking for battered copies of old Françoise Hardy albums and the like.
Good luck.
I did a thing on her. Me and my friend, we used to do this podcast. We did it for a few episodes called instead of book club, it was album club, and we actually did a episode on her. She was all new to me, but I looked at some of the old videos that were probably couldn't have been made these days. All I remember is like girls on swings. There was a lot of footage of girls on swings, and I was like,
Yeah, girl. The extraordinary thing about Françoise Hardy is, she was so beautiful that Bob Dylan wrote a poem about her and stuck it on the back of one of his record sleeves, I think. And she was raised, I think, I'm right in saying, by her grandmother, who spent her entire childhood telling her she was an ugly little child. It kind of explains the melancholy in so much of her songs, I think.
Yeah,
okay. Okay,
Yeah,
so we're
it
talking
was a
about
discovery for me, and I liked it too. But it
we're
was all
talking
new
about
for me.
like love and albums and stuff like that. Ian's huge into music history and stuff, and he told me that Eric Clapton stole George Harrison's wife with the song Layla, and then George Harrison wrote "My Guitar Gently Weeps" in response to him losing his wife. And like it's like there's a story in music. I don't know if that's true or not, but I thought it was a fascinating story.
Yeah, I don't know the details, but I think there is a significant amount of truth, certainly in the idea of them having, sort of dueled.
Well,
Yeah.
Pistols
Well,
at
they're
dawn.
both good
in the shape of a
songs.
song.
you know, they're both really good songs. Like I'm trying to teach myself my guitar gently weeps, and it's a tough song to learn. And then Layla is just I can't play that. I'm not rocky enough.
I'm going to say something controversial, and hopefully everyone's okay with it. But I always thought Eric Clapton, and I'm a guitarist too. I always thought Eric Clapton was overrated. I never understood this Clapton is God thing. I never understood, especially in England. I never got it. But I also think Michael Jackson's overrated. So
Lewinsky was talking about Steve Vai, and I think he's an amazing guitarist. He's like that to me. That's like an amazing guitarist.
Well, he's a different kind of type of guitarist. Like Clapton's kind of like a blues songwriter type of guitarist. They're both really technical, but Vai is like a more modern guitarist, jack of all trades. He can, he could sit in. He's like he's more diverse than Clapton, I would say, and he's less focused on blues. But yeah, they're both amazing guitarists. I just, as far as popular music goes, I never got it with Clapton, and maybe it's just one of those things where he doesn't do it for me, but he does it for a lot of other people.
Well, Clapton once said that the guitarist he admired was Prince.
Well, he's pretty good too. I think he's underappreciated as a guitarist, maybe.
What was the song that he wrote when his son died by falling out the window? He wrote I want to say
Tears
it was
in
Tears from Heaven.
Tears in Heaven.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the story of what really happens I find interesting.
So that's what stopped me. Immediately I was like, how's your son fall out a window? It's kind of an unusual way to go for a kid. I mean, parents always think about that. What if this kid goes out the window? I never got a good answer.
Yeah, it's an odd one, that.
When you're a parent, you worry about all these things, don't you? These things.
Apparently not enough on occasions.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget, this man also wrote a song called Cocaine, where most of the lyrics are simply the word cocaine.
Yeah, and he's had a few controversial issues with race as well, in terms of his beliefs about race in the early days.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He said some really nasty stuff. Like I kind of stopped listening to Clapton.
And also about COVID.
Wait, when you say his early days, what do you mean his early days? Like what?
I think in his early solo, around it, I think in the early period of his solo, I think it was early 70s or something. It's not something I've focused on particularly. I don't know the exact details of it. I have read the text of what he said on stage that particular night, and it's not very nice. It is essentially England for the English, in no uncertain terms. And I'm not what you would necessarily consider to be a nationalist, so those are not the things that I favour.
I call that Richard. Was it Richard Michaels that had that moment? Everyone loved him on Seinfeld, and then somebody brought a camera into one of his shows.
Michael Richards.
He had a Michael Richards moment.
Michael Richards, yes.
He called one of his audience members the N-word multiple times.
Yeah,
and it was on tape. And
it wasn't just out of the blue, and it was at a comedy show, so it wasn't just
he was
dropping
at a
the
comedy
N-word.
show, and what happened is he was being heckled by the audience, and he lost his temper. And when you lose your temper, sometimes inner stuff that you hide comes out. And he was a racist. That's what he was.
Maybe he's just like sometimes, like I think with comedians a lot of time. I don't want to defend what he did. I don't really know the details of it, but I'll just say that a lot of times you just have to sort of let yourself go into the sort of the place, and you're like he's trying to sort of shock people or do that. It's not going well, so he's lost control of it. You have to sort of explode or do something really crazy. And in the old days they could say whatever. you know, and they would
nobody
say
had
whatever,
phones.
and that's just how it was. But now you're in the age where somebody videoed it and everybody sees it. And,
Well,
you know,
I'll give you a controversial
There's
take on
better
stuff
ways
like
of handling heckling than calling.
well,
the
yeah,
audience
obviously,
member the
obviously,
N-word.
you know, I mean, obviously there are, and everybody knows that, and that's the problem with the internet. Is like, oh, you got to get your face rubbed into it in this massively shaming way. You know, public shaming was banned. It was banned in the 1700s for being the most cruel punishment. You know, there was nothing considered worse than public shaming,
But
and
it's
you know, 'cause it just
effective.
destroyed your life and everything, and so they got rid of it, and
about
now we
the
brought it
beheading?
back on steroids. You know,
It's-
and yeah, we know what he did was wrong.
It's
You
effective.
know,
I think
and he's
part
an
of it-
example to
well-
all of us. It's good. Okay, and he's
well,
serving as
here,
a shining
let-
light now to everybody in the future. Like, don't do
People
that.
should feel shame for behavior that is egregious.
Let me just
And-
say
and-
something.
Problem
about
is,
that.
I'm all for
Yeah.
public shaming.
I think there's a much more fundamental problem at issue here,
Read
though,
the
which is
Scarlet
that
Letter.
the idea of an apology has become demeaned. Like, people's apologies are so like mealy-mouthed these days that the idea of doing something bad and then just standing up and making an apology, it's almost like it's unfashionable. You can't demand an apology. I don't know. I long for the days that somebody does something really, really bad, really stupid, and they get up the next day and they're faced with the headlines and they get straight on the phone to the TV station and say, I want to come in and I want to make an apology. That was just appalling what I did. And then everyone goes, he meant that. And it's the end of it. You know, it
Yeah,
might
I think
linger in
yes,
the
that's
back
true.
of our
People can tell
mind.
if it's a genuine apology, or where you're
Some
coming
people
from. when
don't
you say it,
apologize. You know, some people
Which is
just
the
don't
even
apologize.
worse thing.
Yeah, sometimes if you apologize, people just makes people more angry.
So,
I'm
showing
sorry
my-
if I have caused anybody hurt. It was
Yeah,
not my intention.
showing my younger age and stuff, I watch a lot of YouTube channels and everything, and there's a lot of quote unquote influencers or YouTubers that have done egregious things. They've reached out to children. They've shysted money away from their followers. There's been some really awful things, and so there is this like set formula that the YouTubers have for their apology. And it's like they follow it to a T of like, this is what you say in the first paragraph. This is what you say in the second paragraph. And there's this YouTuber by the name of Sunny V32 who has identified this pattern, and he's made videos on people's apologies and how they're disingenuine. And how you can tell they're disingenuine because they follow this pattern, and it's just fascinating.
I'm making a stock video that I'll just post for all my apologies. It'll be very general, like boilerplate, and it'll just be like frequently asked questions. I'll be like frequently done apology, and you can just click on it if you're offended. Just
Yeah,
go
hook
straight
it
there.
up to an AI so that it can like take your image.
Yeah, I'm sorry you
can
were
just say
offended,
apology as much as you
right?
like. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can have,
You
here's
should
me
start
apologizing
practicing
24 hours a
apologies.
day, non-stop for the rest of eternity.
I just want to like touch on something that I think didn't get touched on with this Michael Richards thing.
Yeah.
So when two people really get in a fight and they're super angry at each other and they're just saying things to hurt each other, you might drop the N-word, you might say something sexist, you might say something that makes it sound like you're racist when you're actually not. You're just trying to hurt somebody with words. And this is the most offensive thing you can say to him. So I don't know if Michael Richards is a real racist. I don't know if he spends his free time trying to harm black people, try
He
to
made
do
a
real
bad
harm. I
decision.
think he was
He made a
really
bad decision,
pissed
but he got
off,
massively punished
and he
for it.
shouldn't have said that. But I think
Way
it's an
out of
important.
proportion
I
of what
think
he
it's an
did.
important distinction.
But there are
Because-
better ways
because
to
there
handle
are-
heckling than that.
For sure,
Okay,
but
yeah,
I
of
but I
course.
th- but
Have you
the-
ever-
the-
have you ever seen
wait
the,
this is the point I'm getting to. Wait,
yeah, let's
the
go to
point
this
I'm getting
point.
to is this. I find it difficult based on an angry person saying one thing at a show to call them a racist. I say it's bad judgment, and he was definitely trying to hurt that person with words, but I'm not ready personally to put that person in a racist camp. And I don't think it necessarily means that. I've said stuff that I've regretted that in today's climate, you could label me some stuff that I'm clearly not, and people that have known me for years know I'm not. And I think we're very quick to put people in that racist category.
But there's also the idea of perspective too. Like you say, okay, I've said stuff and I'm not a racist person, right? And from your perspective, you're not. But what if you say something in front of a Black person and they hear that and that's all they know you as, is what they heard you say, and it's a racist statement you said, right? From their perspective, you are racist.
It's a tricky call, I think.
We're being binary again, though. We are.
But Wyndham's right. Binary, yeah.
There are shades, there are grades, of just how bad you are. The moment you've stepped into the world of using that word, then you are by definition racist. It doesn't mean that you are permanently racist, that you are 24/7 a racist, but it means you have a racist bone in your body that thought that was an acceptable thing to say. But it doesn't mean that you do that all the time and that you think that. It is like also, as you're saying.
And here's the good news. Here's the good news.
Time that you went beyond your own limits,
Yes.
And it's this binary thing. Can we just not like? I think he's a little bit racist.
Here's the good news to that, Wyndham. The good news is, if you have got a bad bone in your body, did you know that you regrow your entire skeleton about once every 12 years? So there's no single part of you that is still the same part as it was 12 years ago. And this occurred to me, actually, that, when you come out of your womb, do you hit puberty the moment that the last sort of cell that was in your mother is like now gone, and now you're entirely you out in the world? I just thought I had this week. But, apparently your skeleton regrows every 12 years. There's hope for you. You can change, but it takes a while.
You switch up all your cells. I forget what it is. It's like every 7 years or something like that. But the thing is, like the blueprint.
That doesn't sound right to me.
I don't know.
Go fact check me.
There's growth rings inside of the bones.
I was reading my. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was reading my old diaries during the pandemic for various reasons, and all
the sex bits. You were just going through all the sex bits, weren't you?
I was the Morrissey of the crowd in terms of my sex life, I'll tell you. But I was struck at various points during reading these diaries, particularly the period that I wrote 13 to 16, and then I stopped. But there were, I thought I was a fairly sensitive, fairly adjusted child in terms of how I saw the world and stuff like that. And I was very shocked to read some of the stuff that I wrote, in that it was, what I would consider now to be, pretty insensitive, socially insensitive. But, reading them now, I'm absolutely horrified that I even thought like that for a way. But I was very much conditioned to think that way by the sort of rather upper class surroundings that I had, and they were, those were acceptable views. I'd like to think,
and you hadn't really heard any other views. You hadn't been told any other views at that point, So how would you not have those views?
I evolved, and I think I evolved very fast as I started to realise the injustice of what I was hearing around me in terms of the vocabulary and the value judgments that were being made. And I adjusted fast. I think we can all adjust. I don't think I can necessarily regrow an entire skeleton in 7 years, but. I do think 12. I can refine my views on the world.
And you will do whether you like it or not.
Refine my views on music.
Wyndham, do you still keep a diary?
No, tragically, I don't. And I talked about this just a few days ago with a friend about how much I regret that I stopped when I was 6. Several sort of summaries of trips I'd done over the years. And when I moved to Berlin, I started writing stories about these experiences I was having in the city and with the traveling I was doing. And, a couple of them were about time I spent with Lee Hazlewood and ended up in my book. But no, I don't write a diary. And it's tragic because I'm also writing a book at the moment which partially covers the last 3 years in terms of my reaction to something that I had learned about when I was younger. And I wish I'd kept a diary on that because I wouldn't be struggling so much to remember how did this whole thing evolve from me thinking about something and then understanding its implications far better. This was a long 2-year process. So
maybe this trip would be a good place to start doing it again.
The Colorado trip.
Yeah. You don't have to keep a good diary. You could try keeping a bad diary.
I find the best.
That is the differentiation that every writer needs to learn. Just right.
Just right. Yes, do it.
The best diary writing that I do for myself is when I'm writing to myself like it's a Civil War letter, and like I don't know if over on your side of the pond you have Ken Burns documentaries on TV.
I don't know if I didn't know. I know. Well, I'll be here. I don't know. Ken Burns. He does. He's very good historical documentaries. I learned a lot about this country from Ken Burns.
But he's done a ton of documentaries on the Civil War and the Wild West and stuff like that. And so he always has this voiceover of like, "Dearest Clara, it's been 6 days since my last letter," and that's kind of how I write to myself.
Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, he's like the David Attenborough of American history. You'll have like David Attenborough does the nature program and he does the history program.
Yeah,
Dear Scarlett.
Yeah, that's kind of what I do. I write, Dear Diary, and it's been 6 days since my last entry. The weather's been very rough this week.
See, I thought your
you're
diary...
assuming I don't write like that.
yeah. I've read. Yeah, I've read his book. It's very much. I read it. There's a lot of young Wyndham in this book, which I quite enjoyed.
Wyndham, do you still write in cursive?
Do you know what? Every time I pick up a pen to write, I can't even write my signature. I have to practice before I sign something.
Oh, I write every day with.
So you're a keyboard junkie.
I'm a keyboard junkie. I mean, if you could see the state of this keyboard in front of me right now, like the space bar, there's virtually none of the original, casing left.
Yeah.
You can see through into the underneath. It's just absurd.
I'm
a heavy typist.
The science fiction author Stephen Barnes, he was writing. He's switching over to Google Docs because he believes the voice dictation software that's built into that is good enough where he can get the first draft out. Do you experiment at all with voice dictation?
Yeah, voice dictation only in that for the last 3 years I've been picking up my phone and just taking notes, and sometimes I can't be bothered to type it. Today I did actually finally invest in an AI transcription service because I've become so frustrated at just doing an interview and then having to spend 3 times as long just typing the damn thing out before I can even start. And I have to say it's the 3rd time I've used a transcription service like this, and it does really, really help. It's one of the only things where I can't deny the absolute brilliance of AI.
I played around with it a bit myself recently. Yes.
For Restream, the closed captioning is done by AI. And so, after we're done broadcasting, it takes maybe about 5 minutes, and then there's closed captioning available on all the outputs.
Oh,
that explains a lot of the typos I see in subtitles, though, which are always kind of upsetting or annoying. I've actually subtitled quite a number of German films over the last 10 years or so, and it's funny because I don't have any training in subtitling. I had to learn all the rules about it and stuff. But I think one of the reasons that this little group of directors come back to me to do it, I work with a German friend, is that I take real attention over the words, and it beats AI. There's just no doubt it beats AI. I had a transcription of an interview I did with a lute player, oddly enough. There's not many lute players that I would want to talk to, but this one I did. And all the way through his interview with me, he kept on talking about his lute pick, like a guitar pick. And once I'd got the transcription back, I had to spend, I think it was about 25, 30 minutes going through the transcription and changing it so that instead of it's at this point, what it said all the way through was not the lute pick, but the lute pig, which was obviously quite a fundamentally different thing. Yeah, he's definitely not playing it with pork.
Yeah, but is that even a thing or? The lute pig. Okay, so it's 2 words. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, it was
the subtitles. The subtitles I admire most were on the show Clown, Danish comedy show. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. It's well worth looking at. There's a couple of movies. Look, the first one's really good. But the show's hilarious. But there's something about the subtitles, I think, that are just really well written, and the timing is quite important with comedy. Sometimes it's a habit I've got. I've got bad hearing, but like my parents, and my parents always watch everything with the subtitles on, and I'll do that too sometimes, just so that I can get all the nuances. But comedy, they've got to be done pretty well, and the timing's got to be right on, or it sort of spoils the joke.
I have to admit, it's funny you say that. There are certain TV shows that I watch in English, and I still have to have subtitles. Like I can't watch The Wire without subtitles. I can't watch Luther without subtitles. And it makes me feel very inferior and like I live in a very small little bubble that I can't understand. What a bunch of kids in East London are saying.
Yeah, it's good. And I didn't know this show had subtitles either, because now I can go back and find out what these guys have been saying all these years.
The Wire, are you talking about the Baltimore show? The HBO show? Yeah. Okay.
I love The Wire. It's an amazing show, and everyone should watch it.
I have not watched it. I should watch it, yes.
It gets really high reviews. I just never tapped into it.
I
know a lot of
doesn't like it
love
because it wasn't made in Britain in the 1970s.
What I like about it is the fact that it's very honest. Like if you watch Law and Order, or you watch Monk, or you watch anything that has cops in it, they always put the cops in the best light. Always, it's propaganda. And
propaganda.
Yeah, and so The Wire treated the cops like real flawed people that made mistakes and sometimes were fucking idiots. I'm sorry, freaking idiots. And you go, okay, that's more believable than these perfect, glorious, can do no wrong people that, come on. We've all met a cop.
Do you know what show the police say is the most realistic depiction of being a policeman?
Reno 911.
Barney Miller.
Oh, you mean it's boring? It's mostly boring, like sitting around the office talking, drinking coffee, like that.
Yeah, it's probably true. It's like the politicians all say Veep is the
Amber,
one.
check your mic. We can't hear you.
I prefer to think it's like Police Squad, Leslie Nielsen and Police Squad.
I like Reno 911. That's what I would like it to be like. I thought that show was hilarious.
I loved it when they found the dead clown car filled with about 30 clowns, and they had to pull the bodies out of the car.
What was that? Was that Reno?
Yes. It was the greatest skit they ever had.
They're
crying because they're pulling these dead clowns out, and they had to sort them by clown types,
by color, by length, by shoe length. That'd be good.
I'm just going to take a brief interval, if you'll forgive me for a moment.
Yeah, no worries. I'll just explain to everyone that Wyndham's calling from Berlin. I made that fully clear.
I thought he was in England.
No, he's not still. He's not still in Nately Skewers. He's in England. All right, we're going to have a commercial break now. Coming soon, Urfspace Beyond. Urfspace Heroes. I actually released Urfspace Heroes. Did I mention that? I put it out. It is released and available. You can get it now in hard, softcover, and ebook. All there for your pleasure, reading pleasure, all those heroes. And then in the summer, I'm hoping I'm going to do a Kickstarter for Urfspace Beyond, Into the Radlands, and the Urfspace music album. Oh, which I'll talk about that when Wyndham comes back.
I had a question about something that I probably should have asked you off the air, where all of our good material is, but it's not coming to me. I think it was about the album.
Chuck?
Yeah.
Can I also just drive up to your garage and give you some money?
Well, you can do that anyway, but I currently don't have any stock on hand, but I will do soon. Yes, just showing off my new books there, Wyndham. Urfspace Heroes just released, and
congratulations.
Urfspace Beyond, Into the Radlands coming soon.
Yeah, a book.
And I'm putting out an album to go with them.
I heard.
Yes, so Chris's music's going to be on it. I've got 2 tracks from Chris, the theme from Planet Earth and Raw Dog by the Citrus Kids, his band. And I've got some other bands. Yes, I've had. So I'm trying to get some bands to sign licensing agreements to let me use their music. Our friend Ol West back in England, he's gotten me 2 tracks now. Welcome aboard the Urfspace Express and Punk Zebracorn. So they're both going to be on there.
Punk Zebracorn.
I want Punk Zebracorn. I think I'm calling that band. I'll get into that another time. But yeah, I think he's got his kids' voices on there as well. So that's pretty good. And what else have I got? Oh yeah, so he's got a friend Ava who's got a band Sleepy Folk. They've got a lovely like folky track. I'm going to get on there. So it's going to be quite eclectic. I've got hopefully some electronica coming in there. I've got a really good track from a local band. Two local bands. Artemis, who's on last week, she's got a really good punk track that's going on there. So yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, my first time I've ever tried putting a record together. I've got a sort of basic licensing agreement, and and I'll put it out on sort of CD Baby and stuff like that, and make some nice packaging. I'll do a Kickstarter and hopefully be able to do some nice packaging for it, I guess.
Chuck, I do have some news for you. CD Baby stopped carrying physical stuff. I don't know when that goes into effect, but my friend Joe told me that happened. He called me yesterday and said it's the end of an era. They're not carrying a physical inventory anymore, so you might, I don't know, maybe look
I'll have to look into that. Yeah. Okay.
You might have to look into a CDR.
Well, you can. They still are linked with companies that do that, but yes, maybe you can't probably buy it. Like they probably don't do the physical distribution or something. Yes, so yeah, the physical distribution is more complicated. I don't know. I will be able to get some printed up, but yes, I don't know. I'm not really going into album printing and manufacturing, but I think it's a nice extra thing to have at a show, like with my other books. Yes,
it's funny. Talking about physical formats, I was on Twitter earlier today where Andrew Mail, who's a veteran, well, he'd hate to be called a veteran, but he's a long-established music critic. He was talking about how he's starting to notice that a lot of the CDs he's got are no longer playing.
Yeah,
and that this eternal disc
rot is a very real thing.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, like, man, I threw out large amounts of vinyl in the 90s because everybody told me CDs were the future. And, I didn't resent the fact that we moved online and that we moved to MP3s and MP4s or whatever, but I do slightly resent that this thing which, means that I've got all of these CDs everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, luckily I've got even more vinyl on the other side of the room, but I don't pull these out very often. But it's kind of shocking to think next time I pull these records out, I might find they don't play and they've just been taking up space in my apartment for 15 years unnecessarily because a bunch of record company technocrats told me a lie.
I was told when I was in school.
Sorry about that.
Like I was a media arts major, and I was told that factory press CDs had a shelf life of 100 years, had a whatever they call it. When you store something, an archival life of 100 years, but CDRs were much shorter, and that's what I was told. So apparently not true, because you're talking about factory press stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, CDRs apparently is also a significant problem, but now these 20-year-old discs that we've all got.
This is also a problem with DVDs.
Yeah,
and
and Blu-ray as well.
Yeah, so. At some point, if you have a collection, you need to learn how to rip those files and put them on a large enough storage device like a hard drive.
But everything degrades, Dale. Everything degrades eventually. That's just the fate. As I learned from Dominion Tank Police anime, all art is destined to become trash.
Right,
and
you
that
need
is
to
really
put it into a format that's easier to transfer from one storage device to another.
So we're talking about disk rot, right?
Put it on the blockchain.
Ian and I, we had between us probably the amount of CDs as like one of your racks, not both of them on both sides, but for both of us combined together, we had about that many amount of CDs. So what we did is we took the CDs out, we checked to see if they would play, and then we put them into a binder for CDs, so if they would take up less shelf space, right? We cut out the picture on the front, so then that way we'd stick it behind, so we'd know when we took a CD out where it went back in the binder. And it took us, maybe about 2 weeks for us to go through all of them. Out of all of our CDs, and we had total probably maybe about 10,000 CDs, I would say about 250 of them were unplayable.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just like, I'm talking like one of my Nirvana CDs. I had In Utero was unplayable. It just wouldn't play.
I don't think you were supposed to put them there.
What Kurt would have wanted.
Maybe. Maybe, but I don't know if David Grohl would have wanted that, because he's still around, and he contributed too.
I think the plan is that you rebuy the same album about 7 times. You buy it on vinyl, then you buy it on cassette, then you buy it on CD, then you buy it streaming download, then you pay for it eternally with streams, and by the end of the day, you've purchased things 8 times.
Yeah, and you know what? Okay, so if you like it that much, shouldn't the artist get paid for it 8 times? I mean, assuming the artist getting paid for it.
Yeah, that's a big assumption, I think.
The problem is not everything stays in print.
Yeah.
You could have
Disney just pulled a bunch of stuff. Disney and Hulu and stuff pulled like 200 different programs off of their services, and you can't, like Willow, the new Willow show was one of them. And then there was like a bunch of shows on Hulu that they pulled.
Yeah.
This is a good segue to Wyndham's book, because Lee Hazlewood, I mean, part of what attracted you to that was sort of the hunting and finding. It was sort of so rare and obscure back then, and people like that sort of more than anything. And then what's going to happen to him now? I guess you did a lot to sort of boost his legacy, I suppose, at the end of his life there.
Yeah, I mean, I always slightly wary of saying that I did a lot. I mean, there was a whole group of people involved in this thing. It's just I ended up in this bizarre situation where I seemed to be, at the forefront of this crowd of people. There was no doubt, though, there was a lack of Lee Hazlewood availability that he'd almost cultivated himself since the 80s. And,
yes, he sort of seemed to drop out, didn't he, in the 80s? And then that was interesting, the story about the gold disc that he kept of the, what's his name, the Achy Breaky Heart. Billy Ray Cyrus, yes. That was the one gold disc he kept, because it sort of, the money coming in from that made him sort of wake him up a bit and say, oh, I want to do more.
Wait,
I mean, that certainly contributed, yeah.
So he produced Achy Breaky Heart?
No. Billy Ray Cyrus, the cover version of These Boots Are Made for Walking, which, with it being Billy Ray Cyrus at that particular point, it went ballistic, and so it just meant that he had a steady stream of royalties suddenly reappearing in his account.
Oh, nice.
In later life, yes. And then I think he seemed to me that he really trusted you. Like, he met you, you were sort of quite young and earnest when you met him. And, he could see you a genuine person who, there's probably like a lot of sort of sycophants and people like trying to sort of hang on or what have you. But at that point, he didn't, it was hard to tell, because he clearly was very comfortably off. He didn't have any sort of financial worries.
No, he didn't. No.
Yeah, so he could do what he wanted. But, you got him performing in some shows and doing stuff, and he seemed to be just enjoying that and enjoying having people kind of know who he was at this sort of late stage, and having someone to tell some of his stories to. It seemed like, when he's telling you that story about sort of hearing Frank Sinatra play. That was a great story. I don't know if I can remember it right. Can I? I mean, I'll just tell that story because it was quite a good story. So, if I can remember it. So, Lee Hazlewood was with Nancy Sinatra. They were having they'd gotten together to do the second album or something like that. Was it? At what point was that? Then she said, come along and see my father. And he'd never actually seen Frank Sinatra perform. And Frank Sinatra was performing in Florida, I think. And they flew out. And they had Frank Sinatra wanted the private jet back. She'd kept his private jet to record. And he'd never been in the private jet, I think. And so they went in the private jet. And and he went and he sat down in the front row on Monday night and saw Frank Sinatra perform. And Frank Sinatra just knocked it out of the park, and it was all very nice. There was a whole lot of stuff about the hotel and his clothes, and anyway, it was just Monday night, and he was performing all week, and he thought, okay, I'm going to go back again, and he sort of goes back to his hotel room, and he's wearing my clothes, and the clothes have all been cleaned up and hung up and all this sort of stuff, and he goes back the next night, but then Frank Sinatra's sort of not so good. Or he's quite good, and then the third night he's really not that great, and then he has a fantastic night that's even better than the first night later on in the week. And so Lee Hazlewood really sort of understands how somebody, first he sees how great he can be, and then he sees, oh look, he's just sort of human. He's not always great all the time, but then he's actually even more amazing by the end. Going to see him every week. So yeah.
The thing I love about that story, I think, is in a way it's a sort of metaphor for Lee's career. It's this, there are these periods where he's absolutely amazing, and there are these periods where he's not so good, and then there are periods where he just sort of basically might as well have not turned up. And
Yes.
then, right at the end, there's another, flash of absolute brilliance.
Yes.
Sinatra's last show, I think it was, that on that run is, another absolute, killer show. And Lee's, final years, I think, in many ways, they were the same. I'm not sure that his recordings were necessarily, up to the level of his previous work or whatever, and his performances, were not necessarily. But he came out, and people were just so goddamn happy to see him that really he could have just, sat down at a slot machine on stage and they'd have cheered for him. Or they were just so grateful to see him and just to have the opportunity. I think I write this in the book. It's a long time since I've read it, but I think there was this bizarre thing that we saw, and you see it with other musicians that have comebacks, where when they perform again, we're not applauding just because they're back and they're brilliant. We are applauding because we want them to know how much they've meant to us, and we're so happy that we now have a chance to tell them by yelling at them on stage, and squealing and behaving like adolescent children, which is probably the age when you in front of their music,
I read an interesting article once about a musician who is in one of the classic bands that tour. I can't remember if it was Paul Revere and the Raiders, but he was never in the original band. He was hired as a replacement, and a few replacements in, and he didn't realize what it was like to play to the cult that follows this band from city to city. And as soon as he was signed, all the fans knew everything about him.
Yeah, that sounds about accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's another story in Wyndham's book that I like to right at the end of Lee's life, where he said about the Finnish folktale. He'd heard about a Finnish folktale. You wanted him to put a song together with this band that you were representing.
Spoiler alert.
Is that, well, okay, yes, yeah, well. I mean, I don't know it's a big spoiler, but it's yeah.
I mean, there is a version of that story which perhaps doesn't give away the sort of the little twist in the tale right at the end of the book about that whole thing.
Yes.
But
okay.
But yeah, I had got
people like there's scientific research. Wyndham shows that people like stories better when they know how they end, even when they say that they don't like spoilers.
Well, anyway, so he was, he was dying of cancer. He was this sort of, skeletal figure at home, but he wanted to have one last birthday party, and I was not necessarily sure I could make it. I had, scheduling problems, and I think there was still this sense of bafflement. Does he really want me to go? I mean, come on, me? But at the same time as this birthday was approaching, I had got it into my head that he was going to do one more recording, and he was going to do a spoken word thing, because in his early solo records, he does these wonderful surreal tales between these songs where he just talks in this glorious, mellifluous, buttery voice. And I thought it'd be wonderful to get that voice down on tape one more time. And I was working with another band, an instrumental act from Iceland called Amina. And we struck on this idea that we should get Lee to record, something over the top of this particular piece of music that we wanted to release as a single. So I approached Lee with this idea, and Lee didn't answer for about a week. And then he came back and said, all right, look, if you come to my birthday, then I will record this. And what I want you to do is to find this fairy tale that I heard once when I was in Finland about an island where the snow tastes of sugar. So me being occasionally a little bit sort of, obsessive, I decided this was, an offer I couldn't turn down. God damn it, I'd fixed my schedule, and I now had to find this goddamn Finnish fairy tale. And I sat up for hours that night trying to track something down on Google, just variations of searches, snow, sugar, Finland, Helsinki, snow, sugar, sweet, snow, whatever. Couldn't find a thing. Not a thing. And so I went back to bed. I went to bed that night, really frustrated. And after about an hour of tossing and turning, like, how am I going to get this to work? I just decided to write the first two lines of a poem that's come into my head. At the top of the world, there's an island, a place where the sun never shines. But I scribbled that down, turned the light off, tried to go to sleep again, and then I came up with the next 2 lines. And then about 6:30 in the morning, I finally fell asleep, having written this long poem about an island where the snow tastes of sugar. So I wrote to Lee a day or so later, having sort of read it and just making sure I wasn't hallucinating when I thought it was half decent. And I wrote to Lee and I said, look, I can't find a Finnish fairy tale. You know, I've even written to a Finnish poet I know. And, you know, I thought that was going beyond the call of duty. And but Lee Hayes was asking if there's a Finnish fairy tale about, you know, snow tasting of sugar. He's like, who's Lee Hazlewood? But I said, look, I did get a bit overexcited, and so I wrote one for you myself. And then I didn't hear back from him a few days. And so I wrote to him, hey, did you get it? And the message comes back, did you buy a flight to Vegas yet? So I realized that was a yes. So, yeah, that was his last ever recording. And there is a little twist of the tale, which I am going to keep to myself at this point.
Okay. Well, we have to read the book to find out.
Exactly. But yeah.
Well, I think I sort of guessed it. Actually, I guessed it. Honestly, I thought, you know, at that point, I had a pretty good idea reading the book. I know what you're like, Wyndham, and I thought I knew what he was like at this point, and I think, he's just.
I have a guess too, but I'm going to keep it to myself.
Wyndham?
It was good though. It was all sort of wake me up moment for you. Yeah.
Can I give you a little piece of advice? The next time that you can't find a Finnish folk tale about the snow tasting of sugar, and you write your own poem, tell the person not that you wrote that you couldn't find it and you wrote the poem. Just hand them the poem and ask, is this it?
No, just tell them I found it.
That's the American way.
Just say, I found it. Here it is.
No, you say, is this it? You don't say, I found it.
No question mark, Dale. This is it.
No, you let them decide.
Well, Dale's is slightly more honest. Yeah, I prefer Dale's methods.
Noted, Dale, noted. Whereas my father would have said, ack, which was when he couldn't even be bothered to type acknowledged.
Yeah. Wyndham's father, can I mention this? He was quite high up in the British Army.
Has anyone bothered to tell?
He genuinely once, I wrote to him and said, look, can you tell Mum I'm not going to call her back today. I've actually just broken up with my girlfriend. I'm just really not in the mood to chat, but I'll be fine. And he sends back a message and he just goes, ack.
See, when I hear that, I think about Mars Attacks. Because that's
that's what the Martians, they go, ah, 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 ah.
By the way, I love that film. I don't think it did well in the box office, but I thought it was hilarious.
It's a good one. It's a good one. Yeah.
It was just hilarious, I thought.
It's great. It wasn't sort of box office hit, but it's definitely worth seeing on the big screen.
I think it was funnier than to me that was like black comedy, and parts of it just had me rolling, but I don't think it was appreciated that way when it came out. People
it was because it's sort of a bit bitty. There's not there is a sort of cohesive story to it, but it's quite episodic. And it, I think when it came out in the cinema, it was it wasn't hanging together enough for people, who wanted to have like a 90-minute thrill ride.
The fans had preconceived notions, and they didn't appreciate it being turned into Dr. Strangelove.
Yes,
I think there were preconceived notions on that.
Yeah, there was more to it. Yeah, like Tim Burton's film was quite good. My favourite of Tim Burton's actually now is Big Eyes. I really like Big Eyes a lot. Yeah,
it was just kind of sad. It was kind of a downer, dude.
Most of his films are downers. I don't know if you've noticed this. Think about
God,
it.
I really haven't thought about it. So yeah, I guess I haven't noticed it.
Big
Tim
Fish
Burton
doesn't get the girl, right? Edward Scissorhands doesn't get the girl.
Big Fish was redemptive, and didn't he get the girl? I thought he did get the girl.
Well, he got his wife, but then his wife died, and then he died, and it was her trying to discover who her father was, and discovering he was a flawed man.
Okay, maybe I need to watch that again.
Yeah.
My brain reconstructed it in a different way.
All right. How are we doing for time here this morning, Wyndham? We usually go about an hour and a half, but sometimes we go a lot longer, depending on.
But it's late for you.
I've got to ask, you're in Berlin right now?
Yeah, it's 20 past. It's just coming up to 20 past 7 in the evening here.
Do you have a house or a flat or?
I have an apartment. When I moved here, I gave up using the word flat. I'm a very pretentious man. I went multi-culti, as they call it here. It's an apartment. I have an apartment here, a lovely little first floor apartment. It's about, I guess, 900 square feet, and I'm paying a pittance for it because I've lived here for so long, and the Berlin has certainly had favourable, laws about rent which were favourable to tenants.
It's about 20 years now you've been there?
Yeah, I moved to Berlin in 2004. I moved in here a year later.
Is it supposed to be?
It's the first place I've ever called home, to be honest. Like my home. I've spent all my life moving around.
Not lately skewers.
I mean, that was my parents' home.
Yeah, that was your parents' home. Yeah.
Where have you lived then? Besides Berlin, besides this tiny little village you met Chuck in.
Well, I grew up with a military father, so we tended to move every 2 to 3 years. But we didn't move anywhere terribly exotic. I mean, various places in the south and southeast of England, like Cambridge and Camberley. And then we moved to Derry, or Londonderry, depending on your political persuasion, what you call it, which at the time was the late 70s. So it was not a particularly great place to live. Beautiful people, a beautiful countryside, but it was we lived, we had to have our car checked for bombs every time we got in it. Then we spent some time in Germany in the 80s, which I didn't enjoy at all. I didn't know anybody here because I was also sent to boarding school from a young age. So I didn't have any friends from school here and stuff like that. And then I lived in various places in London over the course of 10 years or so after university, which was down in the southwest of England. So I was just constantly moving around.
Yeah. Also, Amber, I just want to point out, Naked Skewers isn't quite as picturesque as it might conjure in your head. It's like fairly decent size, but basically alongside the A30, which is like a big dual carriageway plundering into Basingstoke, on the top of the hill. So you go out into the dual carriageway and you get run over very easily, and then but you get a nice view of the towers of Basingstoke in the distance. States,
quaint little images of tiny little cottages comes to mind with people walking.
There's places like that around there.
Yeah.
They're just lining one road. But bizarrely, there is a 12th century Norman church at the bottom of the hill.
Oh, yeah. It's one of the oldest sort of churches around in England. Very old church, yes.
Do you speak German, Wyndham?
I am now German.
Oh, you're a German citizen?
I am now, yes.
You have to speak the language.
I do speak the language. I know it sounded like I was trying to get out of that question. I do speak the language. I am not fluent in the language. I actually find it harder to understand it when it's spoken than I do to speak it. I learned it as a child, but then didn't use it for 25 years. But yeah, my German is adequate.
Was it difficult to get German citizenship?
Well, here's a funny thing on that subject. The first meeting I had with the bureaucrats was like a sort of interview, a 20-minute interview or something. And I came out of it and I got a call from a dear friend who said to me, "So how did it go?" And I said, "I think it went well. I get to do the next round." She said, "Do you have to do the language test?" I said, "You know what, honestly, I don't think so. I didn't actually understand what he said." And I didn't have to do the test. I didn't have to do it. But I did have to do the sort of social historical test. And I'd like it to be known that I did get full marks in that.
Yay!
What is that?
German history.
The socialist oracle. What? What'd you
it was essentially like, so and so was at war with Germany during this period of time, and Germany was at war with these people.
It was just recent German history and how politics here works. Like what is the name of the
like civics or something.
And which of these 3 towns was in East Germany? Just questions like that to make sure you had a basic understanding of German culture. And it was multiple choice.
Where's Oktoberfest?
They wanted me to succeed.
No,
that's cool.
Did you get in there as an employee or as a retiree or?
No. I got here because I qualified as somebody who'd lived here for 8 years, and the political machinations in Britain had meant that for me to stay in Berlin, I would have to either become a German resident or a German citizen. And I decided that I wanted to apply for citizenship, because that would enable me to continue working in other places around Europe, because it would maintain the rights I had as an EU citizen rather than purely as a German resident. And, you know, I love Berlin. I've been happy here ever since I arrived. But, you know, I don't know what my future holds. You know, sometimes I dream of spending out my last days, you know, being whipped by the ocean on the edge of the Western Irish coast, or moving. I was in Greece a couple of weeks ago, and, you know, sometimes I go to Greece and I just think, why don't I live here? I mean, the summers are obviously unbearable. But so now, as a German citizen, I have that freedom to go and live in any of these places, which to us is as important as you have, you know, thinking like, you know what, I'm tired of California. I want to go to Florida. God help you.
No.
No.
I actually I am getting tired of California.
No.
You know, I'm not the only one that feels that way. The state's losing net population.
No.
No.
Just no to Florida. Just no.
Well, Disneyland and the Scientologists. I've often thought like joining the Scientologists, you know.
I'm like, yes to
Why?
Florida. Florida's changed a lot in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, but like my family lives there, so I visit like once a year or so, and I just don't like Florida. I just don't like the weather. The laws are weird.
You can't get around that, I don't think.
Yeah, it's
I got to draw some Gator people for Goodwin Games next. That's going to be fun. I was thinking how I'm going to do them. For the X crawl, so it's modern time. So I was going to do them with trucker caps and dungarees. But I was thinking maybe like they would, because they're wading through the swamp, so maybe they're just like kind of lederhosen, because they wouldn't need like waders. They'd probably just want bare legs. So they're wearing sort of...
No, you should give them waders.
I should give them waders.
Yeah,
I don't feel like Gators need the... They'll be up to their
Put
knees.
Crocs on them.
Put Crocs on them, yeah.
Put Crocs on them.
I was going to have one in a little flying fan car.
Wyndham, you're obviously well-traveled because you're talking about Germany, Greece, you come over to Colorado. What has been the most valuable language for you? I mean, you're able to get around in all these places with English?
Most places, yeah, not everywhere. I mean, that's one of the great, you know, privileges of being English or being American, you know, being an English speaker, is that you can get to most places in the world and you'll find somebody who understands you. It is, you know, it's a remarkable thing that we have this ability. It does mean that I can go to all sorts of places. You know, in the last 10 years, I don't travel as much as I used to. Because I just work at home much more. But, you know, Argentina, Spain, Portugal, Greece, America, Norway, these are all places that I've been. And, you know, I've been able to have a fabulous time, get some sense of what the culture there is like, whilst still being an arrogant white European who can't be bothered to learn the language because I feel I've got more important things to do, like recording, you know, reviewing a record.
But when you're in all these countries, you're going to the record shops, or you're seeing what the band scene is like. I mean,
it depends. I mean, I went to Argentina because they were screening the Travis documentary that I had worked on, and you know, I was not going to miss the opportunity of flying all that way on their dime and then not going and seeing a bit more of the country. And you know, Argentina was just spectacular. Absolutely extraordinary. The only places I've seen as beautiful as that were Norway and New Zealand. You know, places where I remember in Argentina, I followed this like dirt track somebody had tipped me off about. It was like a sort of 20-mile dirt track. It took ages. I had to drive up the side of this mountain. And I remember getting to the top of this, and I had a particularly evocative, perfect piece of music playing in the car at this point by a band called Snow Palms, who use a lot of mallet instruments. It just seemed really perfect. The car turned around the top of the hill, and I looked down over this valley, and I literally burst into tears because I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. It was just this endless vista that seemed to have, you know, whatever Disney could come up with, it would not look that beautiful. It was just amazing. That was an unforgettable moment, but that was because I made a documentary about a Scottish band that I didn't like.
I know it's not that bad.
Wait. You did a documentary about a band that you didn't like. Usually it's done the opposite
Wyndham's
way.
like the villain.
Yeah. Usually it's done. So is this a documentary where you have a change of heart?
It's. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Like, the concept of the film is that when I met the singer, I told him I didn't like his band, and then I said,
"Oh yes,
I don't know why I said that. Let's talk about this. Let's." So I wrote an interview. I did an interview with him in which I talked about the manner in which we adopt other people's opinions as our own, and the manner in which we judge things. And we like to think that we put on a record and we decide if it's good or bad, but we don't. We put on a record and we enjoy it or we don't enjoy it, and that can be influenced by a multitude of different things, as much as anything, like what the record was that you put on before it. I remember when I moved to Berlin, I put my iPod on shuffle. I just couldn't face listening to music as a job. I just needed to. I loved music, but I just didn't want to have to think about it. And I remember numerous times songs coming on and me going, "My God, I love this. What is this?"
Yeah, I use Pandora for that reason. I've always liked Pandora for that reason. Yeah.
Invariably, these songs, the songs that were coming on, which I couldn't remember what they were by huge artists, and they were off records that I acknowledged that I'd loved, but these were songs which had always been overshadowed by what came around them. And so when we put on a new record, a new song or whatever, we're deeply influenced by what we've just heard, how that is going to affect our response to it. So the movie
I've been thinking of that on the lot with this, putting this album together and what order to put the tracks in. Like which ones sound better when they come after the other one, and it's sort of like I'm sort of continually like, I can't.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with mastering engineers as well. Like, people think mastering engineers are just kind of like the people that get it up to commercial loudness, but the sequencing is important too, right? Because you're coming out of one context going into another song, leaving that context going to another song.
Yeah, I mean, and I've sequenced a few albums, and sometimes you actually have to think, like, do I want a 4-second gap here, or do I want a half-second gap here? Do I want that song to end and then bang, straight into the next one? It's vital. All of these things affect our responses to these things, because most of culture we respond to emotionally. So we need to acknowledge that part of it. And this is why I say there's when it comes to art, there's no such thing as truth. There's only opinion. And one thing that used to really annoy me working in the industry was somebody would say to me, "Dude, have you heard that Fortet remix of such and such?" And I'd be like, "I don't really like that." And they go, "What? What's your problem? Man, you are so wrong." And I'd be like, "No, I just didn't like it. I just didn't like it. Is that okay?"
It's like they wrote the track. I'm like, calm down. You didn't write that track. That's not your track.
Are you getting a royalty?
Yeah.
Wyndham, do you think tools like the iPod with the ability to do your own arranging, hearing songs out of the order of an album, improved things?
I don't think they necessarily improved things. I think they altered things for the good and for the bad, most likely. Okay. I think that, the album is a wonderful conceit for presenting music, and I love it. I love the fact that it places certain restrictions, but ultimately they're easily, they're flexible restrictions. But I also like the idea that people get to choose how they listen to their music. I do think it's a shame that we have now made it so easy to skip between tracks and to playlist things that records, that for instance, we don't realize the benefits of living with a full record, that an artist has spent a lot of time trying to create a script, so to speak, and that we should be on some kind of journey. But there's a lot of artists who don't do that as well. So, it's not the be all or end all.
I have a 21-year-old friend she's 21. She listens to good music and stuff. And when I'm like, oh yeah, you have to listen to The Wall, because we were talking about Floyd and everything. She'd only listened to a track there. She'd never actually listened to the whole album before. And I'm like, no, there's like a movie that they made of this. It's a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. You have to listen to it in order. Blew her mind. blew our mind that like that much work was put into an album to tell a story.
It's funny to me because sometimes I get sent records that I need to listen to, and they send them to me as a download rather than as a stream or as a physical product. And sometimes the downloads they don't put the track names on them, or they don't put the track number on them, or whatever. And it'll take me a while to realize that I'm listening to a record and that I am taking notes about the wrong songs, or that the songs are in the wrong order, and that the artist has, taken the time to put this record together. And so, it could even be some kind of conceptual, record or whatever, designed to go on some journey. And I'm just listening to it in alphabetical order.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes, I'll think about that, of listening together. Yes.
Wyndham, you're familiar with different ways of playing music now. If you have an optimum hardware setup, how do you prefer to listen to music? Do you want to listen to it on vinyl or just go online and buy the MP4? Does it matter to you? I mean, is there a ritual that you like because I love the ritual of going to a record store.
Dale's a retail fan of old-fashioned retail, such as used to exist before in the times before the pandemic.
In the before times.
The before times, as we call it. Yes.
Before the boom booms.
Pre-pan and post-pan.
No, the before times is what they called it in Mad Max.
Yes, the Mad Max, the before times. But yes, it is a before times. It's just like I'm not as in love with retail. Shopping for me is always a pain in the ass. So
how do you listen to music at home?
To answer your question, I actually started to realize it happened once before. Around the time I moved here, I had a couple of tough years working in the business, and I realized probably about 2019 that I was just every single song I heard, every piece of music. It was just it had become a reflex to judge music. I mean, if I saw my nieces in the school, orchestra or whatever, I judged them. I couldn't just enjoy music, and I realized that I needed to make a separation between my work listening to music and the pleasure that I'd always had out of music, because these two things had basically, So
it's also more youthful to be judgmental about things. When you get older and you've sort of had more of a go at actually trying to make things and do things, you're like, well, actually, it's a little harder than
there's that. I mean, it's also like there was a sheer pleasure of just like putting on a record because you loved the record, rather than having to kind of go, is this good? Who does it sound like? Could I write about this? Is this interesting? Which is my job during the day. And so what I did was I made a rule that I would not listen to any digital music after 7 o'clock every day, because if it was on vinyl, then it meant that it was out. It had been released. It had probably been circulating a while, because I then started indulging this massively and replacing all the CDs that I love with vinyl copies of those records. So I have a rule now that I only listen to vinyl after 7 o'clock at home. If I have guests over and they want me to play something on YouTube or Spotify, I say no, unless there's a very, very good reason. If it's not on my vinyl shelves, I'm not playing it. I don't want to get into that place. I need a safe space for listening to music. So vinyl has become the thing that I love. I live in a city which is full of flea markets, and I've been able to buy most of the records I want at very reasonable prices. If I'm not paying the artist, I feel like I've given them blood, sweat, and tears for 25 years otherwise. So I love vinyl. I love the ritual of putting it on. I love the fact that I have to get up every 20 minutes and turn it over, annoying as it is, because it reminds me that I am listening to music.
Oh, and doctors say that the single most important thing you can do for your health is stand up once every 20 minutes.
There you go.
All you need to do, circulates the body, like once every 20 minutes. Just
I thought it was
just that, which I haven't even done the show, but that will do like most of the heavy lifting for your health.
Vinyl is good for your health.
Yeah.
I went through a vinyl phase as well where I never had, like, I got rid of my turntable around 2000, and then I mixed 3 vinyl records, and I bought a turntable, which is right next to me. And I went through this phase of playing vinyl, and it was almost like kind of meditation, because every, whatever it is, 23 minutes, whatever side of vinyl is, you do have to change it, you know, so you can rest and relax. I used to kind of meditate to it, use it as a timer. But it does get you in a different headspace, because it kind of forces you to focus in on that particular music rather than think about all the other options you have that are a click away.
Yes.
Well, this is the problem these days, and the devices are very good at getting our attentions.
Well, I think we don't. I think that by having ease of use, using the internet, we are killing rituals that we didn't realize how much pleasure we were getting. When I saw Star Wars, well, when Star Wars came out, people lined up for hours to see Star Wars. And it was, you know, you would talk in line, you had a good time, you built anticipation.
Not really. I was bored out of my mind standing in those lines. That's what
Well, you're an
talking
idiot.
about.
I refuse to stand in lines for movies.
Okay. All right.
I never go to opening stuff.
Okay.
I'm not doing it.
All right, but what most people don't realize is that you don't go to Disneyland for the rides. You go to Disneyland to stand in line.
That's
the
why I don't
rides
go there.
are a break from what you're really there doing.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
anticipation is a powerful emotion.
Yeah, and I wonder if having music so easily available, like the way we have streaming, where we have movies on demand, that if we're making them less enjoyable because they're too easy.
I mean, there is, you know, there's no doubt that as a teenager, like the struggles I went through to get the music that I needed, especially as somebody, you know, who was locked away in a very strict boarding school, you know, it was titillating, you know, and when you got the record that you'd had to, you know, hide in the bushes to catch the bus into Oxford, go and buy.
That was you hiding in the bushes.
But living in Germany, I mean, East Germany went through a period of time where it could have been their life if they didn't hide that record in the bush. You know, if they were, like, I'm sure you've talked to people about it.
There's a very good book called Burning Down the House, Haus, the German spelling, Burning Down the House, which is about the Mauerfall, the pre-wall coming down period, and the role that punk rock played in East Germany. And it's based on a bunch of interviews with a number of prominent East German underground punk musicians, some of whom, you know, suffered quite a lot as a result of the fact that they played these underground punk rock shows, which were broken up by the East German police. So, you know, I think it's always quite exciting to read these stories, to be reminded, especially in, you know, what is often a fairly conservative musical era for the reasons we discussed earlier with pop structural limitations. I think it's kind of exciting to be reminded of a period when music really did shake the foundations of society, when music could be dangerous, when people actually heard what musicians had to say, and it was worth listening to.
And it was also sort of new that with records coming along and music and CDs, that bands were making a lot of money at that point. You know, it was this sort of turning tide of the media. The media was fairly limited, you know, but, you know, traditionally musicians had not made a lot of money. You know, they played shows they couldn't.
The 80s was boom time.
Yes,
the 80s
yes.
was boom time.
Like,
Yeah,
they were
was,
getting paid again for
Stadium.
things coming on CDs, and suddenly it was sort of, you know, that market. Then, you know, then the problem was that time with the internet coming along, it sort of started moving back to how it was before, I think, and that's what was reacting. But sort of corporations took advantage of that really for their own benefit.
Yeah,
And then
there was
then they started.
there was a milking of the audience.
Yes, and then, you know, it's just, but people have only got so much attention. You know, you've only got, you know, 24 hours a day of attention. 8 of those you should be spending asleep.
You should be.
8 of them you should probably be working.
You're not?
I have a 2-year-old.
Give an hour So like at the most you've probably got like 8 hours a day of attention to divide up between all the media that there
God,
exists.
I'd say less than that.
Well, yeah, that's it. That's only if you're devoting your
my personal
your life
statement
to
is about half
consuming
of that. I'll say 4 hours.
Yeah. So I mean, like most people have even less than that. So people like diversity for health is my motto. We have diversity on the show in the form of a purple cat at the moment, but we've tried to have a diversity.
I thought our motto was "Don't eat people."
That's our
yes,
motto.
but if you are, eat people of all kinds.
Oh.
Hey.
Do not discriminate.
What about
Wyndham's
from Germany? All right, can we talk about cannibalism and German cannibals? You are dressed in a German cannibal.
You've had cannibals in America too.
Yeah, it's time. Well, Dale's quite a fan of it. Well, that's why I brought Wyndham on, Dale, because he is actually a cannibal. He's a German cannibal.
Okay. Well, we were talking about Michael Richards earlier, and we were talking about how he said the N-word, and it may have been taken out of context and not necessarily mean that he should have put in the racist camp. But remember, if you eat one person, you're automatically labeled as a cannibal.
Yeah.
I'm not connecting the dots here, Dale. But please continue.
Yeah, you can't say, "Oh, I was marooned in the Peruvian mountains, so I had to eat someone to survive." They're like, "Okay, but you're still a cannibal."
Well, the way I would define racism is kind of like, are you actually doing harm to people, and are you doing it based on the race? And I actually think it's a little harder to determine than I just when there's a conflict between a black guy and a white guy, just because one guy's black and one guy's white doesn't mean it's racial. But I feel like there's this thing where we kind of jump the gun on that, and it's a little bit more nuanced than saying.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, though, I think we're looking at, it's a little bit like when the Me Too revolution happened. Like it was long overdue. It was entirely necessary. It's the same with racial, systemic racism that exists in so many societies. The thing is, when you awaken yourself to this stuff and you are actually prepared to respond to it and try and put it right, inevitably the pendulum, which has been over here the whole time, it's going to swing too far the other way because it's built up a lot of kinetic energy. What you're trying to do is find a middle ground. At the moment, I think we are in a situation where it is not hard to claim that some people are being oversensitive. But you know what? I really don't see why being oversensitive is worse than being completely insensitive. I think it would just be nice.
Right.
Nice. Let's just be nice to one
another. Let's think about the extremely empathic people out there.
That's good advice. I think we should don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
I
try to remember what it was, but there's I can't say it because it's a bad word. Anyway, there's a lovely song by Gary Daly that I would recommend everyone listen to. The first song is
did you not listen to the theme tune here? I do have the F word in the theme tune.
That was the greatest song. Okay, that was the greatest song the Pogues never released.
For the greatest web cartoonist ever.
Yeah, it's a great song. Owen Dunn, he wrote a comic called You Damn Kid that's been around for a long time. That did the rounds years ago. I always loved it. Somebody wrote a folk song about my pastime. and I asked him years later, can I use it as a theme tune for an earlier incarnation of my show? And he'd forgotten that he ever wrote it. Did I do that? I was like, yes.
Dude, I sometimes get told that I've reviewed records and I don't even remember that I knew the band existed in the first place. Yeah. That's what happens when you write
a song that good and forget you even did it.
Hey, Wyndham, I wanted to ask you a question about Lee Hazlewood. So there was this dip in his career, this withdrawal. Can you discuss what led to that? Did he withdraw from the industry? Was he disillusioned?
He'd enjoyed all the hits with Nancy Sinatra, and he was at the height of his fame. He'd already retired before he worked with Nancy. That's a whole nother story. But the Sinatras strong-armed him into working with Nancy, who had been struggling. I think she'd had hits in Japan or somewhere like that, but she had been struggling herself as an artist. And so he'd come out of retirement, then he'd done that. And then having enjoyed all this success, he randomly went over to Sweden. There are multiple reasons, theoretical reasons to why he went. It's never been entirely clear. And then he stayed, and he made a series of records in Sweden. I think it was a more manageable level for him. He didn't enjoy attention that much. These are amongst the greatest records he ever made, his solo records. And then kind of just disappeared. He just stopped making records regularly, and the ones he did make were not very good. I think he was not necessarily in the best frame of mind during this period, and he had removed himself so far from the business, apart from picking up his royalty checks, by the early 90s.
When you say not in the best frame of mind, are you talking depression or drugs?
I wouldn't like to say. I just don't think he was in the best state of mind. I think he was enjoying.
It seemed like he was quite focused on his family, though. He said, like it seemed like he had a happy family life when he grew up, and he tried to have a happy family for his kids as well. Yes. It seemed like. I mean, I don't know what other, he had various different relationships in his life, but
yes. I think he definitely was a family man. I think he had certain insecurities and such like. That it meant that to be very famous was maybe not quite so pleasant for him. I think there were other things going on in his life, and he just decided he wanted to scale down. And then having scaled down, he kind of lost his mojo, and had no idea that anyone was even talking about his music in the years that followed, after he'd sort of just decided, you know what, I'm going to wander between Florida and the south of Spain and live off my royalty checks in a modest fashion. There's this weird dip where I think he just got tired of it, and he decided that he didn't have to do it. He was lucky that he had made enough money. So, fair play to him. I'm just glad that he had the opportunity at the end of all this to suddenly understand that whilst he might have given up, no one had given up on him. That his music really, really mattered to even if it was just a small crowd of people. We all thought he was some kind of musical genius. Phil Spector would never have existed without Lee.
That was very interesting. Yeah, Phil Spector wouldn't have existed without him. Yeah, so I mean, Phil Spector is like,
is there an album?
The most famous record producer, isn't he?
Like, if I was going to get started listening to this stuff, is there anything you'd recommend to get started with?
In terms of his solo work.
Yeah, is there like an album in particular that you're like, this is probably where you should start?
Or... Oh, well, Wyndham's got a good list in the back of the book. It was good. I was like, early on in the book, I was like, I really wish Wyndham had put in like a sort of list of all that records that he did. I looked at
his catalogue is fairly chaotic, to be honest. I mean, it's a bit odd. He switched between record labels, and the songs on some albums which turn up on other albums and such like. I mean, the classic is Trouble is a Lonesome Town, which was his original first solo album, which originally was just kind of recorded as fun little demos to somebody else for him to sing. And he just tells these little stories between each of them in this deep, dark, growling voice, but they're little strange stories about an undertaker who drinks, embalming fluid and stuff like that. And that's just a beautiful, beautiful way to hear Lee Hazlewood for the first time.
All right, I think Mocat has to leave us now.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I should bounce too to make music.
Yeah, well, all right, that's a good show. When we hang around, we'll have a little chat off the air afterwards. But Mocat's got it's time to. I don't know what Mocat gets up to.
It was a pleasure to meet you
in their spare time.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Yeah. My pleasure.
Yes, because when Mocat goes to sleep, we all have to go to sleep too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry.
Wyndham knows what I'm talking about. Bagpuss, but check out Bagpuss, Mocat. I think you can find some Bagpuss on YouTube.
Did you realize that throughout this entire interview, you've been wearing a lampshade on your head?
Do you know what? I do therapy
around.
every week. I do therapy every week, and I've become so immune to the sight of the lampshade, which used to really embarrass me. But there's something about the sofa that I've molded the sofa so that this is the most comfortable position. I've switched around, but
when you're being particularly profound, the lampshade seemed to align with your head, and there was some real wisdom coming out. So
the thing is, if I sit like this, then I have what looks like a pair of testicles hanging behind me.
So that's
I saw that.
Those are actually Donald Trump golf balls.
Oh,
Really?
God.
You should hold on. Those would probably be worth something if they aren't already.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't like the sound of holding on to Donald Trump's golf balls, to be honest. All right, well, on that note, I think we're going to call the end the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Wyndham. Wonderful guests, wonderful conversations.
Yes,
Hope
thank you,
you'll join
Wyndham.
us again in the future. Viewers, hope you've enjoyed the show. Next week, we have cartoonist Steve Troop coming on, and puppeteer as well, man of many talents, and I feel like I have another guest after that, so I'll have to look it up. But yes,
Nadine, I think after that.
Oh yes, okay, yes, yeah, not to be confirmed, but to be confirmed, but yes, I hope so. That would be wonderful. All right, so thank you very much, everyone, and thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Here's a theme song for Chuck Whelan Showy. He asked me to write one, but I stole from David Bowie. Here's a theme song. Chuck Whelan is the best. We have lots of hosts, but we're